Welcome, empty nesters. I'm so glad you've tuned in today. This podcast, I think, has been on my heart since the inception, and I have been praying about this for about 3 years, and I'm thrilled to be in season 3 today. We have George. George, tell me how to pronounce your last name. I meant to ask you that at the very beginning. Welcome, George.
It's my pleasure, and the last name is pronounced Stahnke.
Stahnke, that's exactly what I thought. And do you ever have anybody say stanky leg? Do you ever do that at a wedding or a dance? I think that's a real thing.
No, but they've called me Georgie Porgy since I was about 5 years old.
Oh, yeah. I have a friend whose husband has dealt with that. But listeners, George is from Focus on the Family, and I'm going to have him introduce himself and share all about him. He has a wonderful bio. But this podcast today is about what women need at this particular stage in our lives. This truly is for empty nesting, thinking that you are married, you're living at home, and what do you need from your man? And then, honestly, ladies, we're going to talk about what we need to offer to our man. This cannot be just a one-sided relationship. George and I were talking at the beginning that we have to remember that our marriage, the goal of marriage from God's perspective, is to best reflect Him. And so I just hope that this podcast will draw you and your husband closer together. I hope you'll listen to it with your husband. And we have a lot to learn from a wonderful man who has dedicated his life to helping families. So George, thank you for being here from Focus on the Family. And please tell us all about you.
Well, I am older than I've ever been in my life. Married for 45 years. 5 adult children, 16 grandchildren, have been in ministry for a little over 40 years, primarily in church-related ministry as a pastor and also a counselor. I've been working here at Focus on the Family now, coming up on 18 years. And I love the Lord Jesus Christ with all of my heart, mind, soul, and strength. And my wife, who is my closest neighbor, as myself.
I love that. And her name's Linda. So, Linda, thank you for sharing George with us. George and I were talking kind of off the recording here that 16 grandchildren just sounds wonderful. What a blessing. And George, do they live close to you?
I'm very grateful they do. Our oldest daughter is in Texas with her 2 children, but all the rest of the kids live right here in Colorado Springs, so we get to see them on a very, very regular basis.
Oh, that's wonderful, especially during COVID when things got so hard. It's nice to have some close by. But I also want to brag on George a little bit. I was looking at the bio, kind of getting ready, and it says that he takes an average of 250 phone calls a month. I can't imagine. That's a lot of phone calls.
It's a lot of phone calls. There are times when I feel like I need to just go and take a shower. Some of those calls can be exceedingly grievous.
Well, and I admire what you do every day. Our oldest daughter is a mental health professional, and just the amount of time on Zoom and just you're constantly pouring out and listening, and your brain is engaged all day on the behalf of others. That's a laborious task, and yet God really calls people to do kingdom work in that regard, and I just can't even imagine all the people you've helped. I also want to mention a couple things you're involved in. Are you still working with Wings of Grace Counseling Services?
I am on the board of Wings of Grace Counseling Services, yes, and also have my private counseling practice, Renewal Ministries of Colorado Springs.
Great. And can listeners find you on websites for both of those places?
They can, if they type in their browser either my name or just Renewal Ministries of Colorado Springs, I am all over the place.
That's wonderful. Okay. And then also, so many places that you've served as a missionary, and that's just India, Philippines, Ukraine, China. I just admire that so much. I've only been on one mission trip in my life to Nicaragua, and it was life-changing, and I just admire your work in those other countries.
Oh, thank you. I wish every Christian had the opportunity to take at least one short-term missions trip, because it just makes life a little bit clearer. How we live in America is not even remotely close to how the majority of people live outside of America. And just having that perspective is so important.
I agree. And it was eye-opening. It was also really humbling. I think you'll appreciate this, George. Listeners, I agree with him. If you can take one trip. When I got to Nicaragua with our son's baseball team, he was at Harding University, and we took a mission trip to Nicaragua. And we got to our, I guess it was just a center, and we got to our room, and it was a sheet, a bedspread, a bed, and then they handed us one towel. And I thought about my life and how I used 2 towels every time, one for my hair, one for my body. It was luxurious. And that one towel is what I had all week. And it made me realize the abundance of what we have.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Well, so listeners, today, I know you all are ready for us to get to it. So many of you, I often hear from people, and I'll get an email that'll say, basically, George, it's like, what do I do if I can't get my husband to lead us? And so in a lot of readings I've done, and George, please chime in anytime, the kids have gone and here you are. And it's your new empty nest. It's a husband, it's a wife. And what I hear from a lot of people is they feel like strangers in the same place, or the wife feels like maybe she has purpose, but she can't get her husband to come alongside her. Do you see this in your counseling?
I do, and if the truth be told, long before the children left, they were already experiencing that loneliness, that sense of relational separation, almost like roommates living in the same home. But now the children are gone, and the loneliness has simply increased exponentially.
It seems like it's being talked about maybe a little bit more, but I asked George, you all, to send me about marriage and divorce rates. And so, George, can you talk a little about the myth of what you all see in that? Because that's something we all need to know. The media feeds us different information.
Yeah, marriage and divorce rates are not an exact science for sure, but what we do know is that people who truly act on their faith do have lower divorce rates than the general population. So a married couple that goes to church together, their divorce rate will be significantly less. It really is a myth that Christian divorce is exactly the same as out in the world. Absolutely not true. It just is not true.
Well, and that's refreshing to know about. And listeners, you can find more about this at the Focus on the Family website, which is focusonthefamily.com. And then just put in marriage divorce rate. It should come up. George sent me a link, and I'll add that to our notes on this podcast, George. And that's wonderful. And so faith is the key. But as you talk to couples and they come in, and where do you even start with a couple? And let's say the wife is, asking the husband to come. They get to the counseling office, and the wife basically just says, I am lonely. I don't know what else to do.
It's so true. And I have to say, on defense of the man, many times he feels exactly the same way. He doesn't express it in the same words, but loneliness, that sense of isolation, is so very, very real, and it's incredibly painful. I would suggest maybe a little bit more painful, especially for a woman who has been a stay-at-home mom, sacrificing so very, very much to care and nurture the children, and now that the kids are gone, and looking at that magnitude of that sacrifice and now where the relationship is with her husband can be incredibly overwhelming. And so I talk to them about the love bank. If we give attention to the small things, we will always have the greatest reward. And so I give them very, very practical hints, helpful tools that give them the ability to make those love deposits, because the scripture says where your treasure is, your heart will always be. So we need to build up that treasure chest within the emotional heart of each person.
That's so good. When my husband and I received our own counseling, we've gone several times, listeners. I think we went in our year 7, wasn't a super effective. We got a really good trip out of it, but we didn't really dive in. And so I think we went year 11, but year 15, we did this love bank thing. And I'm telling you, there were so many things I needed to do to pour into my husband. And it seemed like he was the one that had to do this because of an event we had. But us learning how to be reciprocal was one of the best things we've ever done. And to ask each other, how is your love bank? Are you feeling full? Does it feel empty? And where do you even start there?
Mm-hmm. I think, couples seldom do this, but I give them a homework assignment in the very first session. I have them stand up. And they're looking at me like, did we pay this man to have us do this? So they're standing in my office. I have them embrace, hold each other, draw each other closely. Now, husband, I want you to pray a blessing over your wife in a voice out loud that she can hear. When you're finished, she will pray a prayer blessing over you. I want you to seal it with a kiss. It is so interesting. The husband is feeling so awkward. It's like, you mean pray out loud?
And right
yes, sir,
now,
out loud.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so they do. And then I ask them, so how did you feel emotionally when you were lifting your wife before the Lord? And this homework assignment literally does not take 60 seconds. But if they do it every single morning, it's amazing the result, that sowing and reaping, because you're combining physical touch, words of affirmation, quality time, wrapping it all up with Jesus. And again, it's that love bank deposit that in time begins to generate amazing interest and dividend.
And there's something about holding hands together. You know, we had a busier than usual morning. It was a busy Monday podcast morning. My husband, Gordy, had to head out real quick. But we do try to hold hands and look at each other in the eyes and have a quick prayer. And sometimes we just say, Lord, may all we do and always say be of you today. And then love you, bye, and give each other, a quick squeeze. And that does change things. I miss it. I miss it if we don't linger for coffee. But George, let's say that there's a couple, especially a wife, because I've had several wives email about this particular topic. How do you even encourage a woman to talk to her husband about how to even maybe start counseling if they've gotten so lonely and things are so lopsided? And how would you start that conversation or encourage a woman to do that?
I think when you look into the scripture about who has influence, do women influence men more, or do men influence women? It's really interesting. Women, I would say 4-1, are the influencers in scripture. And so I would say to the woman, the first thing is you've got to acknowledge the fact that you have influence. So the only question becomes, how do you use that influence? Because so many times a frustrated woman, when speaking to her husband, is disrespectful.
Yes. And
respect for a man is huge. It's huge. So when you talk to your husband, soft voice, smile on your face, and just ask this, sweetheart, do you have any desire at all to work with me to bring healing into our relationship? And then let him answer the question. And a normal guy is going to avoid the question. Well, what do you mean, Mary? What are you trying to say, Sally? And just repeat the question. Sweetheart, we've been married for 15 years, 30 years, whatever the case may be. We've been married a long time. We've got children. I love you. But our marriage is in a very, very desperate state. Do you have any real desire to work with me, to bring healing? And the husband will answer the question. It's either going to be, yes, I will, no, I will not, which is painful. Or in most cases, the man's going to say, well, I just don't know what I want to do. And then I encourage the woman, be sure to finish the conversation. If you have any real desire to work with me, to revitalize, re-energize, bring healing into our relationship, we have to see a professional counselor.
I think that's
wonderful. And I think,
yes.
Yeah.
And the tone
I think the husband, tone and facial expression. Body language, depending on who you read, is 60 to 90% of communication. So your word choice can be terrible if your delivery is excellent.
That's so good. And listeners, I'm going to tell y'all an embarrassing, terrible story about something I did to my wonderful husband that was not wonderful at the moment, nor was I. We were in our probably early 30s, exhausted. Our children were 6, 4, 18 months old, and we were probably just at a crisis point. We were trying to do Christianity. We weren't really walking with the Lord every day. So if there was a new Bible study or a thing that we're all supposed to be doing at church, we were showing up with masks on, probably performing our Christianity and our faith. And we just weren't doing well. And I'm a reader, so I would think, how can we fix our marriage? And it wasn't like, how can I fix myself? But it was like, how can I fix him? How can I fix this? And my poor husband, I tossed a book. Do you remember that book a long time ago, George, called Point Man?
Actually, I've never heard of it.
Okay, there's a book called Point Man, and that was kind of the thing going around our church. And I just said, well, if you would just read this, I think we'll be fixed. And how horrible. I mean, it was horrible. And so thank the Lord, we finally got into counseling, and we learned a lot of these things about tone of voice, that really the greatest of these is love. And we learned about the love bank, and we learned about just respect for each other. And I have a lot of regrets. And listeners, if any of you do too, I've been there. I totally understand the regrets that you may have about how you said something, or you wish you could have done that differently. Some of the ladies I've talked to that wanted me to do this podcast said, and George, please help answer to this. They said that they've tried softly, then they bring it up again. They've done everything they know to do, and then you turn up the volume. And then it gets to where, you feel like you really tried to do things respectfully, and there's still just no response. And so then it is frustrating. If you raise your voice and then you say we're critical, what do you do in that place? One of my friends I know wrote a letter, and so the letter that she gave her spouse spoke to him, and that's how they ended up in counseling, because she said everything I said fell on deaf ears. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, when you raise your voice, people go deaf. If you're raising your voice to your children, if you're raising your voice to your spouse, totally inappropriate, because a soft answer is what turns away wrath. And so in your frustration, you can raise your voice, but then you just dig the ditch a little bit deeper. I think when a woman or when a man, when you're trying to talk to your spouse and you're not getting the response that you hope for, then I think we have to go to Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17. When you've exhausted that one-on-one scenario, then go to someone that your spouse respects and trusts, and ask them if they will intervene. Ask them if they would be willing to be an advocate for the marriage. So, Mary has been talking to her husband, and he just stonewalling. He says the right thing, but there's never the follow-through. So I would encourage her, go to his best friend and say, listen, I love my husband. Our marriage is not doing well. We need to see counseling, but he is incredibly resistive. Would you be willing to speak to my husband so that our last years can be the best years of our life? And then I do warn the woman, this is risky. because your husband could become so volatile. You did what? You talked to my best friend. You went to our pastor. You told him about what's happening in our home. But I tell you what, Jesus was a smart guy, and I believe that three-step principle actually does work. So wife, if you're out there and you're desperate and your husband just refuses to yield, refuses to listen, find someone that he respects, someone that you trust, that can give him the same message with the hope that he will come around and go with you and get that help that you need.
That's so encouraging. And it's so, it is risky, but I think at the same time, I would not want to have any regrets involving someone that would come alongside you authentically. I know, George, when my husband and I were in our valley at that particular time, we did involve friends, and we involved a wonderful local counselor. We involved people from the church. We had to kind of lay our hearts kind of were just outside our bodies because we needed healing. But I am so thankful we did, because the friends and the help the friends we had, the community, the help that we got, we would not be where we are today. And neither one of us want to go back to where we were. We didn't know how to begin. But listeners, if you can get to that counseling office, whatever way it is to get there, involving a friend, involving someone else, I encourage you to just be and put yourself in the hands of someone like a George or someone locally that has so much training to help you learn how to go forward. I really liked our counselor a lot because he said, Charlotte and Gordy, we're going to spend a little bit of time with some archaeology. We're going to dig into the past a little bit. We all have stories. And what he reminded us is that as a human being and an individual, I have a story. I have parents who raised me. We have a story, and they have a story, and it goes back and back. My husband, the same thing. But you don't need to spend countless hours unearthing all of these things. What a counselor will try to do, and George, please speak to this, is they'll try to get you to draw a line in the sand, involve Christ, hold his hand, and go forward together. So how do you encourage people to do that?
It's well said, Charlotte, and very grateful that you and Gordy had the insight, the wisdom to reach out for help. Sometimes if the willing party begins counseling even by themselves, a good therapist knows how to draw that spouse into those sessions in time. And there are just very specific ways in which you can begin to do that, because I've had to do that on so many different occasions where the husband or the wife was willing, but the spouse was unwilling. In essence, if we fix my husband, we can fix everything. Mm-hmm. And so many times that's typical. If we could just fix my wife, the only problem in their marriage is my wife. If we can fix her. So I encourage them. It's like, go ahead, let's start one-on-one. And I guarantee you, within just a few sessions, we will draw your resistive spouse into the situation, and have been very, very successful in doing that.
And it's just it takes a strong person, listeners, to go to counseling. It's not, I felt weak. I felt like a failure. I felt like here we are, this Christian family that other people know is fragmented, and yet it was one of the most refreshing and healing times in my whole life. I had so much to learn about my own self, and I'm there thinking, if we could just fix, a few things over here in this man, and bless his heart, I had maybe even more on my side that just a really great counselor drew it out. And one thing that was really, really helpful for me when we were going, and our children were really young, and so now they know the work that we've done as young adults, that we've gotten the help that we needed. But I was in the, counseling chair thinking, well, if I can just get him to do, let's say, 5 things the same way I do them. I just felt like I had a way we needed to do things. And our counselor was so great. And he said, Charlotte, you have a way, And then we have Gordy has a way that maybe you're going to approach things. But what I like to encourage you to do is God is the way. And so we're going to follow the way together, and we're going to figure out. And I mean, it was like blinders fell off for both of us.
It's true. It's interesting, learning to work together as a team with an understanding that in every marriage, we have our strength and weakness. And Linda and I, when we were married so many years ago, I think honestly, emotionally, she was more mature than I was. She had been a Christian for so many more years than I was. And initially, I was so angry that she was so right so much of the time. I mean, it's embarrassing to say that, but it really is how I felt. And it took me years to recognize that she's not a threat. She's an incredible blessing. And we've learned to maximize our strengths. And in doing so, we've minimized each other's weaknesses.
Oh, that's so good. I like that. Another thought that just popped into my head, listeners, if you're one of these ladies that has emailed and just said, please cover this, and you feel hopeless, one thing that I think is really encouraging is as you're listening to this podcast, and if you feel hopeless and you're frustrated with your husband, take out a little notebook and write down what is true about that man that you have all these maybe children with, or you have this life. And I would write down things like, even at our lowest point, I was thankful that Gordy was such a great provider. He was really great with the finances. And then one of my friends said, well, hey, he comes home every night and that garage door goes up. And that was the truth. And so it was little things that made me start to look at the situation with a lot more hope. And I remember I read a book, I think it's called Forgive and Forget, and there's a story in there about taking your own eyes out and you put them on the shelf and you put in the eyes of Christ every day. And ladies, if we all get dressed and put mascara, makeup, imagine putting in the eyes of Christ, and how do you look at that man with those eyes? That might help how you even approach him about going to counseling.
Well said. Well said. There is a wonderful test that I actually give every single couple that I work with called the 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. It is incredibly simplistic, but it can be a game changer. Because if I speak French and you speak Spanish, as much as we want to connect and communicate, if there's this language barrier, no matter how desperate we are to connect, we simply will not do so. Understanding the 5 love languages, I think, a critical component. And so I will have every single couple take that test so that we can identify the primary and secondary language. Because if, again, it goes back to that love banking. If your love language is quality time, then you need to define what that means to me, because I want to connect with you, but in a way that you can embrace easily. So I would encourage all of your listeners to take the test, buy the book. The principles are simplistic, but it can be a very real game changer in that relationship.
It really can. It sure was for ours. I'll do a very quick story. We were introduced to that with our counselor. And so, George, help me. Let's see. There's the 5 love languages are quality time, service, words of affirmation. What am I missing? There's Gifts. And
time, service, words, gifts, and physical touch.
Physical touch, yes. So
yeah, physical touch and closeness.
Yes, I have this wonderful servant husband. I mean, he will clean out the car, put gas in it for you, do things like that you wouldn't know how that happened. Like I would just be like, oh, I guess the gas is full. And he would unload the dishwasher. He does all of these things. And I would miss that he did that for me. I just thought that he was kind of doing that. And when we had the young kids, he was doing that. But my love language is words and touch. So when we were able to articulate, and then I did not have gifts of service. And so I needed to start serving Gordy by doing little things like special things of service for him. And we kind of had a checklist in a way of like, how can we love well? It started to change our relationship. And we had missed each other's for years and years and years. So that's a good thing.
Absolutely. You know, it really is in the scripture, a very interesting verse. The little foxes come and spoil the vine. It's the neglect of small things that create the greatest chaos. But if you don't know what the small things are, as you mentioned, Charlotte, the 5 love languages, the love banking, most couples are clueless. They're listening to this podcast, and it's like, I've never heard of this. No one's ever told me about love banking. And these simple little things can produce an amazing harvest of renewed love and appreciation in a marriage that's gone dry and cold.
Yes. And, you know, I'm sympathizing just as a woman too. And listeners, it's like, I can just feel you listening. I know some of you are doing what I've done in my life, where you're probably sitting, listening to this podcast or whatever you're doing, working out, walking, and you're like, well, that's just not true for me, because if my husband really loved me, then he would already know this. And George, don't you think that's one of the biggest? It's so awful how our culture, movies, TV, all these romantic novels that are not real. Listeners, that is not real. And marriage is a wonderful thing that unfolds over decades, and you're going to learn about each other every single new day. And it's I feel for some of the men that you know, that's something that women say is, well, if he really loved me, then he'd know what my love languages are, and we wouldn't even have to take a test. So what would you say to that, George?
I would suggest that you call the community college and ask if they're having a mind reading course. If they are, sign up men. Now, I have to confess, I've taken the course twice. I failed miserably. I still cannot read my wife's mind. But thankfully, she has learned to tell me what she needs, and I have learned to respond to what I have heard.
That's so well said. And, you know, listeners, like, we try to even do things now. I will have too many things going at one time and drop many balls, and my sweet husband will try to come behind me with the broom and, you know, fix this and clean up this because I've got the date wrong about something. And, you know, just this weekend, I told him, I said, I'm so sorry. I just feel like my erring in a lot of these ways has affected you. And I just want you to know I've really seen how you've come behind and served. And it was really cool. He just looked at me and said, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think he like any of us, he did it out of love, but it was nice to be acknowledged. And then he did what we learned in counseling. We did not know how to do this till we went to counseling. But he looked at me and he said, is there anything else that I can do to love you well? And I say that to him sometimes. We will still fail. We will argue. We will raise our voice. We do all the textbook things wrong. But when we remember everything we learned in counseling, ladies, I encourage you, we have to say this to our husband too. How can I love you well in this?
And I would say this in regard to a caution. There are some men who would tell you to violate your conscience in order to love them well, and you have to be strong enough to say, sweetheart, I love you, but what you've asked me to do, I cannot do. Because there are some men, especially when it comes to sexual favors,
yes,
things, expressions that they want their wives to do in order to feel somehow like a man. And you, as a woman who loves the Lord, must have the courage to say, no, I love you, but this is not going to happen.
Thank you for covering that. Yes. And it's hard, the empty nesting years. When I talk to women, it's hard. Our bodies are changing. We have menopause. We have all different things. You're not feeling quite the same. There's so many other things going on for women too that we do wish our men could read our minds. And I love that you've covered that. Thank you, George.
Mm-hmm. So in regard to the empty nest, it's important that you accept the timing. I mean, all 5 of our adult children have left. And we love them so desperately. But my wife and I have never had a child-centered relationship. We never have. And the person that really has the greatest difficulty with the empty nest typically is the person where the relationship has always been based on the child. It's been a child-centered relationship. And so now the children leave. They've never really been that close to their spouse. And now they don't have an outlet for their love. They don't have an outlet for just satisfying their inner need to be accepted and loved. So for those of you that have children still at home, please be careful. Always focus on your spouse. Focus on your children secondarily.
Guilty as charged here. I am honestly, I look back and I think about how thankful I am that we went through a valley when our children were 6, 4, and 18 months and got kind of a restart button and learned a lot of healthy things. We were parenting side to side for many years. We loved each other, but I tell young couples, we do marriage mentoring at our church, and I tell the young couples that we talk to that we had plexiglass in between us. We could get as close as we could, and it still felt like there was this plexiglass because we didn't know love languages. The minute the kids needed something, we would drop what we were doing, help them, parent side to side. We'd have a date here and there, but we really weren't investing. We were just sort of doing this life. Mm-hmm. And so, George, what about investing, and can you talk to a date night, and how do you even start? If you're mm-hmm. doing side to side, and you've given mm-hmm. us some great advice about the love languages, and you've given us great advice about some other things to think about a love bank and how to talk to our spouse, mm-hmm. what about a date? And I know what women are thinking that are listening to this right now. Well, my husband never asked me out on a date. Why do I have to tell him that's what I need? So what would you say about that?
You tell him what you need because he's not a mind reader and he's focused on so many other things, which is unfortunate because his primary focus really does need to be on you. And so what I encourage people to do is just pull out your calendar and plan a date night every week for the next 6 months. Try to make it the same day, the same time. Oh, but what about spontaneity? Well, spontaneity would be in addition to the regularly scheduled night. And if you know the love language of the other person, then you can be very specific about the kind of date that will really reach to the deepest part of their soul. So quality time for my wife, a good date for my wife and I would be exactly what we did this past weekend, where we sat down and we watched the Bronco football game together. Now, she's the sports nut in the family. I am not.
Oh, I love that. That's so different. Yeah.
So for me to sit down and actually stay awake and watch the game and cheer with her is a huge connection. Simple thing, just taking a walk.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't have to cost money. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be so simple. Can we just take a walk together in the cool of the evening? Keeping romance alive is critically important, not just for a woman. It's equally important for a man. And you said something a little bit earlier. You know, men enjoy being chased.
Yes.
They just do. And I would encourage the ladies from time to time, don't be afraid to chase your husband. Don't be afraid to just grab him by the collar and say, I've canceled your appointments. We're spending the day together. My wife has done that to me on more than one occasion I was walking to an appointment and I saw my wife walking towards me. It's like, well, Linda, what are you doing here? Well, I'm kidnapping you. Well, what do you mean you're kidnapping me? Well, I've canceled all your appointments for the next 3 days. And she had packed a suitcase, and I left my car in the parking lot, and we drove up to Denver, and I was just flabbergasted.
Way to go, Linda. We need to all learn from Linda. That's a great thing. And I've done that for my husband before, too. I took a cue from our counselors and had him meet me at a certain place and had packed a bag and, got the dogs off to the vet. And we had a night at a hotel. And it was much needed. You don't have to spend the money to do this, but the rewards of that were very special. And I do think that's wonderful. George, I'm looking at this and we have to wrap up here in just a minute, but I want wives to hopefully sit and ask their husbands to listen to this podcast together. If a woman is able to get her husband to sit down and listen on the other side, and we hope this will happen all over the whole globe, what would you say to that couple? I've had a couple people ask me to ask a counselor address this question. What is Christian male leadership? And I don't want to leave the podcast before someone in your profession answers that for us.
Thank you. That's a tough question in a really short amount of time.
Yeah.
Men will lead if they have been given permission to do so. There are times, I think of my own marriage. Linda was more mature emotionally. She was more mature spiritually. She wanted me to lead, but she gave me permission to do so, even though I would not lead as well as she did. I needed to grow as a leader. I needed to learn how to lead, and I could never have learned how to do that if she had not given me space to do it. And there have been times when I have fallen flat on my face and been embarrassed. But she never ridiculed, she never demeaned. It's like, George, you're trying and I'm blessed, and let's continue. For the gentleman that perhaps leads too strongly, recognize that your wife is not a piece of Tupperware that you can burp and throw into the drawer. Recognize that she is a Ming vase. The scripture says that she is precious, a weaker vessel, not weaker mentally, not weaker so much spiritually, but that she is precious. When you have something that is precious, you don't just toss it around like a piece of Tupperware. You're careful, you're gentle. Men need to be gentle, not demanding, not condescending. And a woman will respond to that. The greatest need of a woman is to be cherished. If your wife feels cherished, she will follow you to the end of the earth.
That's beautiful. That's so true. And, I will just say what women need from their man in this phase is going to be really unique. And that's why I hope that this podcast will encourage all of you listening. For the women that are listening that still feel alone in this, please listen to it again and search scripture. You can also call Focus on the Family. You can call a local counselor and get started going if you're able to do that. There's also a lot of free resources, George, on your wonderful website that should be encouraging to women. And then if you're able to have your man sit down and listen, we thank you, men, for listening and for leaning in. I truly believe this podcast started for me to offer encouragement for people to live in the empty nesting phase with passion and purpose, and to lean into what the Lord wants you to do. And to remind couples that together you should be unstoppable at this age of life. You can reflect Christ with more time, more together time than you've ever had. Any thoughts about that, George?
You're absolutely right. I believe at this stage of life, we have more to give than at any other time in our lives. This is not a time to find a lazy boy and to grab another Bud Light. This is a time to enter deeper into romance. Our last years together should be the absolute best years of our life. It's not just about the husband and wife. It's about legacy, generations of people who love the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yes, that's so beautifully said. That's a wonderful place for us to be able to wrap up. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. Men, if you tuned in, women, I would encourage you to look at that husband sitting right there by you and say, thank you so much. That's a first big step in doing this together. And listeners, there's no reason to be living together in the same house, lonely and married. Today, could this be the first day that you lean in a little bit better, that you ask the Lord what is His will for your marriage and how you walk that up together, and do all things in love. That is the key. The love of Christ is the only way we can all go forward better together. And George, I'm going to ask if you have any parting thoughts, and please remind listeners again where to tune in to you and find you at Focus on the Family.
FocusOnTheFamily.com. If you need to talk with a counselor, whether male or female, we've got a wonderful staff of people that love the Lord Jesus Christ and will be very caring. They will be good listeners. If you need us to help you find a qualified Christian therapist in your area, we will be more than happy to do that. And again, it's FocusOnTheFamily.com. And just if we can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to give us that telephone call. The phone number is so simple. It's 855-771-4357. Again, that's 855-771-4357.
George, thank you so much for your time today. We are grateful. I wish I knew you in person. I hope if I come to Colorado Springs, we try to come often. I would love to find you and just thank you in person for being here. And listeners, I encourage you to do something my mom taught me many years ago, is just to, if you think about joy and you don't feel like you have that right now, Jesus, others, yourself spells joy. And that is really helpful. And to just not look to your husband to fulfill you. Only Christ can do that. And I hope that you can lean in, listen to the wonderful words from George, look up Focus on the Family, and tune in to some other episodes. We're just getting started with season 3, and I'm excited about other episodes and other guests coming. And I'm so grateful to George for his time today.
God bless you, Charlotte, and give my regard to Gordy. He sounds like an amazing man.
Thank you. We've had quite the journey together, but I'm very blessed to have him. And we are really enjoying this time of life now, but we had some years that were really hard, and I'm glad we fought through it. So thank you for your time. And listeners, I'm going to sign off today. George, thank you again. And I pray everyone stays healthy and hopeful during these times. And thanks for tuning in to Empty Nest Guests.